On June 25, 2025, at precisely 6:09 p.m., the state of Mississippi ended one of the longest waits in American death row. Richard Gerald Jordan, a man once sentenced to death in 1977, was finally executed after nearly 5 decades on death row. He was 79 years old. That moment, exact to the minute, silent, clinical, marked not just the end of a life, but the quiet closing of one of the most prolonged chapters in American criminal justice. For the prison staff, for the legal community, and for the few who were still watching, it was a conclusion long delayed. But for many, it was also unsettling in its quietness. There was no spectacle, no dramatic standoff. Jordan's execution did not make major headlines. No candlelight vigils stood at the gates of the Mississippi State Penitentiary. No protesters with signs. No long-form opinion pieces from the nation's top newspapers. It came and went like a whisper. Just a quiet end to a life that had been confined within a 6-by-9-foot cell for nearly half a century. A space smaller than the average walk-in closet, with a concrete floor, a steel door, and a small cot. In that space, Richard Jordan waited. Not for months, not for years, but for decades. He was not just another case, not just another number on a list of executions. Richard Jordan was the longest-serving death row inmate in the United States of America. He spent more time under the shadow of death than any other man in the country. And yet his story is not just about a crime and a sentence. It is about a system that moved, then hesitated. One that changed, then corrected. One that advanced, then stalled. A system that promised closure, but delivered decades of silence. In August 1976, Gulfport, Mississippi, was a quiet coastal town with a steady rhythm, calm streets lined with modest homes, family-owned businesses, and little in the way of violent crime. Nestled on the Gulf of Mexico, it was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by name, and where the police blotter, more often than not, was filled with minor infractions. A public disturbance here, a broken tail light there. Life moved slowly in Gulfport. It was not the kind of place where people vanished. But that stillness shattered overnight with the disappearance of Edwina Marter. She was 34 years old, the wife of a prominent local banker, and well known in the community for her quiet elegance and devotion to her family. Her sudden absence was not just a mystery, it was a rupture in the town's sense of safety. Richard Jordan had been drifting through life at that point. Once a soldier in Vietnam, he returned home with no parade, no steady job, and no direction. He carried with him invisible wounds, emotional scars that never quite healed. He had no fixed income, no place to call home. The war was over, but something in him had never left the battlefield. Unemployed and penniless, his future uncertain. He lived from place to place, untethered and restless. And as his options dwindled, something inside him hardened. The idea came not from anger or ideology, but from desperation. A plan simple, cruel, and cold. Kidnap someone for money. Not a random target, not someone obscure. Someone who mattered enough that a ransom would be paid quickly and without police involvement. He demanded $25,000, a sum that, at the time, was substantial but not unthinkable. Enough to disappear and start over with. He chose Edwina, perhaps because of her husband's status. Perhaps because she seemed predictable, her routines visible and easy to track. Jordan watched her for days. Learned when she left the house, which route she took, whether she drove alone. He studied her life like a blueprint. And then, on August 10th, he made his move. He approached her near a shopping center at the wrong time in the wrong place. With a gun in hand and no hesitation, he forced her into the trunk of her own car. She didn't scream. She didn't resist. It all happened too fast. Once she was locked inside, Jordan made the call to her husband. The demand was direct. $25,000 for Edwina's safe return, no police, no tricks. Just cash. And quickly. But before the Marters could even organize the money, Jordan faltered. Something shifted, maybe fear. Maybe a calculation that the plan was unraveling. Or maybe just the pressure of realizing that this crime, this decision, was bigger than he had prepared for. Panic set in. Instead of following through, he drove Edwina to a remote wooded area just outside of town. He stopped the car, walked to the back, and opened the trunk. She was still alive. Still trapped, still hoping to be freed. And then he shot her, once, in the head. There was no struggle, no final words. Just a sudden, irreversible end. He left her body there, hidden under a covering of leaves and dirt. A shallow attempt to conceal what had happened, though even then it seemed temporary. As if he knew it wouldn't last, it was an execution. A single deliberate act meant to erase a witness, but it couldn't erase what he'd done. In the days that followed, Jordan didn't run far. He didn't flee the state or assume a new identity. Instead, he turned himself in. He walked into a police station and confessed. Whether it was remorse, fear, exhaustion, or all three, no one really knows. But he told them everything. He drew maps, gave names, led them to the place where Edwina's body still lay. There was no trial filled with drama, no drawn-out mystery, no questions about guilt. Jordan had confessed. He didn't ask for a plea deal. He didn't fight the charges. The system moved quickly. Within a year, he was convicted and sentenced to death. The judge agreed. The public supported it. But within years, cracks appeared in the process. Jordan's journey through the courts became a decades-long odyssey. His first sentence was overturned due to a procedural error. A second trial followed, then a third, then a fourth. Each one brought its own failures. Mishandled jury instructions, ineffective counsel, improper conduct. Every time he was resentenced to death. And every time a higher court would undo it. He wasn't found innocent. He wasn't even resentenced to life. He was simply trapped in a revolving door of the legal system, a system that couldn't get the punishment it wanted in a way that it could defend. His lawyers filed habeas petitions, arguing cruel and unusual punishment. They cited his age, the conditions of solitary confinement, and the decades spent in limbo. They pointed to legal precedents evolving around mental illness, ineffective counsel, and the constitutionality of delayed execution. But year after year, courts let the sentence stand. Not quite willing to let him go, but never fully ready to carry it out. Jordan spent nearly 50 years in a small windowless cell. Meals came through a slot. Exercise was limited to an enclosed cage. He saw daylight less than most animals in captivity. Inmates around him came and went. Some were executed, others died of old age. A few got their sentences commuted. Jordan read books, wrote letters, filed legal briefs. He aged in silence. Guards noted that he rarely caused trouble. Volunteers described him as soft-spoken. He never claimed to be innocent, but he also never stopped asking why the punishment never came. There were moments when death seemed imminent. Execution dates were set. He was moved to the holding cell. The process began. Then, at the last minute, a stay would arrive. A ruling, a new challenge, a delay. Each time he returned to his cell, not executed, not exonerated, just returned. Mississippi held firm. Prosecutors refused plea deals. Jordan had at one point offered to accept a life sentence without parole. The state declined. They had pursued death for decades, and death they still demanded. But carrying out that sentence required legal precision. The justice system, however, is often anything but precise. His case became symbolic. Law schools studied it. Judges debated it. The public grew confused. How could a man sentenced to die in 1977 still be alive in 2025? To some, Jordan was a symbol of broken justice, a man punished beyond reason. To others, he was a manipulator who used the system to delay accountability. But the question lingered. If justice is meant to be swift and final, what happens when it is neither? In June 2025, all legal avenues were exhausted. Decades of filings, appeals, reversals, and delays had finally reached their end. The courts would not intervene. The governor of Mississippi signed the execution order. This time the state would proceed. In the final days leading up to June 25th, Richard Jordan was moved to the holding cell, one of the final steps in the process. He had been here before, several times in fact, on the brink of execution, only to be pulled back by a last-minute stay. But this time felt different. There were no new motions pending. No final hour litigation. The silence around him had a different weight. During those last days, Jordan received visits from the few people left in his corner. His attorney, Chrissy Nobley. His spiritual advisor, Rev. Tim Murphy, and his wife. He was described as being calm, at peace, even talkative. He spoke about his life, his memories, even made jokes. It was not the defiance of a man who still hoped for rescue, nor the panic of someone facing death for the first time. It was the resignation of someone who had lived with the shadow of death long enough to become familiar with it. At 4 p.m. on the day of his execution, he was served his final meal. It was simple, familiar perhaps, a final nod to the ordinary comforts denied to him for so long. Chicken tenders, French fries, a root beer float, and strawberry ice cream. He shared this last meal not in solitude, but in company, seated with the people who had walked the legal journey with him for years. He ate slowly, deliberately. There was no rush. By 6 p.m., the final preparations began. Jordan was escorted from the holding area, walking slowly, his steps heavy, his body frail. He was shackled at the wrists and ankles, flanked by prison officers who had likely known him for years. There were no dramatic outbursts, no resistance. He was calm, composed. Inside the execution chamber, he was strapped to the gurney. The observers filed in behind glass. There were no major press outlets, no grand declarations. Just the quiet rituals of a process designed to be clinical. When asked for his last words, he spoke with clarity. He apologized to the family of Edwina Marter, the woman whose life he had taken nearly 5 decades earlier. He thanked the correctional officers for their respectful treatment. He turned to his wife and said he loved her. Then he closed his eyes. The first drug entered his bloodstream, then the second. His chest rose once, then again, and then no more. At exactly 6:09 p.m., he was pronounced dead. There was no press conference. No political statement declaring victory for the justice system. Only a sterile statement confirming the time of death, as if the conclusion of such a long and tangled life could be reduced to a single sentence. Richard Jordan was buried in an unmarked grave. His few belongings, books, letters, and legal documents, were boxed and archived. His cell was emptied. His file closed. But the story of Richard Jordan is not just about innocence or guilt, it is about time. About what nearly 50 years of waiting does to a person. And about what that delay reveals about the country that held him. He was guilty of murder. There is no dispute about that. But over the decades, his case became something else entirely. A case about delay. About institutional hesitation. About a system caught between the duty to punish and the discomfort of carrying it out. Can a man who has spent 49 years in solitary confinement truly be the same man who committed a crime at age 28? Can justice be served when the person facing execution is now old, ill, and living a life more defined by reflection than threat? And perhaps more unsettling still when punishment stretches so long that it becomes indistinguishable from suffering. Are we still carrying out justice, or something else? Richard Jordan is gone. But the legal machinery that shaped his fate remains. Still slow. Still uncertain. Still unresolved. And maybe that more than anything is the real sentence America has to confront. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And is there other cases you think we should cover next? Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video if it gave you chills.